This is Tim,
I'm Mulele.
and this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim with Mulele on Skype in Tokyo. How are you doing?
As well as the quarantine will allow. You?
Yeah, well, we were just talking about dealing with quarantine weight and other things that, going back to, somehow they've become harder than they were
Yeah.
before the quarantine. When I went back to school as a teacher here, my bag suddenly seemed incredibly heavy, even though it was no heavier than it was before the quarantine.
Yeah.
So, a couple years ago, we talked about a comic by Ken Mora, written by Ken Mora, called Caravaggio, A Light Before the Darkness. That was Critiquing Comics 132. And he's working on a new comic, and I talked to him a bit about this comic, which is called Caged Birds. So I'll let you listen to the interview, and then we'll come back and talk about the comic. Ken Mora, welcome to Critiquing Comics.
How you doing, Tim? It's a pleasure.
Yeah, good to talk to you. So, now you've just put out a comic called Caged Birds, or you got two issues that are out. I saw them on Comixology.
Yes, I had them under my own imprint on Comixology, and this month on the 8th and the 15th, they'll drop under the Marcosia banner.
Okay.
And they're a UK publisher, and then issue 3, which I'm lettering now, will be out probably in a couple months.
Okay, and your artist is Italian, Gianluca Testaverde. How did you hook up with him?
Well, I have a interview screening process. I use Facebook. There are a couple of really good resources for hooking up with good artists and people who do other things, colorists. And basically, I usually have a sample page or two, and I solicit people who are interested, and I pay them half their page rate to sort of audition, and then the winner gets their full page rate for that page, and then we sign a contract for the entire series.
Okay, and so what's the comic about?
Caged Birds is a sort of a European melodrama, if you like French and Italian film. It's sort of in that vein. It's a turn of the 1960s, 70s tale of a girl who marries her music instructor in order to fulfill her ambitions as a concert pianist, and then she ends up falling in love with his mistress.
Right, okay. And yeah, I was kind of surprised by how much like full-on sex there is in it. Is that typical of the kind of French melodrama you're imitating here, sort of?
Exactly. I wanted. They seem to be less filtered in their now. My visual storytelling traditions draw heavily from cinema, so that's kind of the vibe I was going for.
I see. Okay, yeah, I haven't seen very many European films, so yeah, I was actually sort of similar to when we read your earlier work, Caravaggio. I didn't quite understand what the first scene was trying to set up. We've got Anna and another girl, and the girl's playing a flute, and it gets, because Anna's kind of goofing around, the flute gets knocked off into the ocean, and then Anna kisses her, and then her dad comes and breaks it up.
Yeah, and busts it, man.
And so I got the idea from that it was going to be a story about Anna and Sophia wanting to be together against their parents' disapproval. But then, Anna goes and gets involved with her music teacher. So what was the point of the first scene?
Well, the first scene is a description of Anna's heart and spirit and where her passions lie. In order to get out from under the cultural biases of the time and of her household, she gets sort of swept up in this bargain to, in effect, be his married lover in exchange for his tutelage in the arts.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not really where her heart lies, but she's if that's what she has to do to play the piano, then that's what she'll do.
Okay, I see. Yeah, so Mulele and I did talk about Caravaggio before, and I listened back to what we said a couple years ago, and it didn't sound like we hated it. We had some suggestions or criticisms of it. So when you hear that kind of thing from us or others, like how do you process criticism of your work?
Well, I have the amazing benefit of being part of a great writers group here in Los Angeles, and the greatest thing about the group is that they're absolutely merciless. So they it's not, and you learn pretty quickly that if you spend your time defending yourself, then you're not really listening to what's wrong with your script. And so there are a variety of techniques I employ to understand critique, because art is such a nebulous endeavor. Quite often, someone will fixate on something that is not the actual thing that's ticking them off. That you've lost them earlier, and now you've derailed their experience. So now, then the strategy is this someone who's simply not my audience, and we'll touch on that later, or is this somebody who has valid criticism that anyone, even interested in this genre of work, would find confusing or would find fault with? And that's what you have to really dig down and be honest with yourself about. And I find that when there's a weakness to my story craft, it's usually not news to me. It's often something I try to bury under my angst or distract myself from in doing other things. But I can usually get to the point where someone's critique resonates with something I had reservations about in my own story. And that's how I approach following other people's advice. And by the way, I re-listened to that. I listened to it a few times afterwards. And my first time hearing it, I thought it was an absolute pan. And so it took me a while to kind of drill down to, it's a good point. And to save money, because this is not a cheap endeavor, I did the lettering myself. And so I was kind of trying to put the same sort of creative zeal into lettering I do into writing. And then now looking back at those early issues, I see that I created a virtual cat's cradle of balloon connections. And so I really hunkered down and tried to eliminate those. And so when you do see some of that, there's some symbolic reason. There are reasons why some dialogue might go retrograde against the typical left to right, top down pattern.
Right. Yeah. There were several places where it was kind of directing me to go left from right to left. Like it's manga.
That's kind of the cinematic theory of you'll notice that most villains enter screen right, and so when you see something retrograde in mine, it's usually a forecast that things aren't going to go well
Mm.
with the trajectory that you're seeing now.
Hmm. Okay. Now you have had some good luck with entering your work in contests. So yeah, you told me that you won a book award.
Yeah, I won the Screencraft Cinematic Book Award, typically an award that goes to novels.
Hmm.
But I took a chance and entered my book.
The
And in fact,
Caravaggio book.
yes, the Caravaggio, A Light Before the Darkness. Um, and so I took that chance. And when the finalist cut came out, I was actually not there. And I was disappointed because I figured, well, I'm a veteran of a lot of screenplay competitions. I thought these were my folks. And if they weren't getting it, then I'd have to question. And then when the winners were announced, and I was there, I discovered a small judging error. They didn't know
Oh.
where to put me, so they created this year the graphic novel category
Oh.
and spun that off. Otherwise, they were debating: are we just going to have two winners here, or are we going to start looking at graphic novels as an entity? So now I kind of paved the way for future people looking for an award venue to consider their work, and they will be continuing to look at graphic novels in their competition.
I see. So you caused them to create a new category.
Yes. So
Okay.
there's also a novel winner of the two of us. I don't know which one would have come out on top or whether they would have split it, but you know, I was happy with the result in either case.
Okay. That's good. So, what motivates you to create things like this?
Well, this came. I got my late in life degree in painting at University of Southern California, and along the way, Caravaggio became a painting influence. And then, as I found out more about him, I thought, wow, this is a fascinating story that would make a fantastic movie along the veins of Cyrano de Bergerac meets Lust for Life. And then someone informed me that there was a bio, and so I ran out and I found at our we have at that time everything was on VHS, uh, and so we had this great local store that had a lot of foreign films on there, and so I found it, directed by Derek R. Jarman, and I was, and there are people who love this film. There are people who absolutely adore it and will rave about this endlessly. But I could not get past, in several tries, the first 20 minutes.
Hmm.
And by the time I finally got through it, because everybody said, oh, there's a scene at the end where he's running through a wheat field, and it's the most beautiful thing, is like he's trying to catch the boat that's going to take him to Rome. And my philosophy on story is that if the most captivating scene happens, a couple minutes before the end, you're waiting too long.
Yeah.
So I rewrote the movie I wish it had been, and that is this book.
I see. Okay. What motivated you to do Caged Birds or just create in general even?
I had always loved writing, and I went back to USC to paint, but I also wanted, while I was there, to take some screenwriting classes. As it happened, I never got to, but I taught myself screenwriting, and and this was the first script I had written, and it took me over in a way that even painting, which I adore, never did. While I would get angst about not painting, writing compelled me to get at it. It woke me up early. It it asked me for time away from other important things, and it so thoroughly engrossed me that it became the passion that after I graduated eclipsed painting altogether.
Okay.
And so when it came to caged birds, I was sort of in that European. This is a British production, but I was sort of in that European mode, and I started examining what is it that fascinates me about this, and I think a lot of it has to do with it being the passion, romance, sex is part of dialogue in European country the way it isn't here, because we're largely puritanical in our traditions anyway. In fact, that was the big. I actually ran these books by my writers group, and that was the biggest pushback from them, is that well, if this is pornography, it's not pornographic enough, and if this is romance, then it needs to be sweeter. And I'm thinking, well, no, it's it's neither of those. It's noir drama, and I jump into it with both feet.
Yeah, well, for me, and I like not having seen films like that, and mostly American stuff, the sex seemed sort of out of place, kind of. I mean, I guess I was thinking, like, when I've seen that kind of story in an American context, the sex would be more understated rather than just showing it happening. So are you then aiming this more at a European audience, or like at people who are into European film?
Tim, I wish I could say I had a strategy, but when it comes to creating, it's just what comes out of me through my digits when I'm at the processor.
Okay.
So, if I were smart, I would be inventing the next Spider-Man or Wolverine, or I would be, taking my lead from other people who sort of broken out of the kids only area or heroic only area, but that wouldn't make creating fun for me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't feel like doing things that are formulaic either, or like just kind of I don't know. There's so much kind of interest in doing YA these days, and I struggle with figuring out how I would do that if I were going to try. I just don't quite get it, I guess.
Yeah, and I've enjoyed a lot of things. Actually, I'm looking forward to your podcast on my aging brain. I'm sorry, the brothers manga were the ones caught in the suit of armor.
The Full Metal Alchemist. Right. Well, our patrons need to help us get to that goal. But yes, Patrick and I have been wanting to start that, and we've got a few episodes in the can, but except I haven't edited them yet. Yeah, that's on the table.
Yeah, I mean that was that was my first, unless you classify Scott Pilgrim as manga, which it's certainly manga inspired. That was my first manga, and it totally captivated me. And I've read others since, but nothing that's risen to that level. And it's certainly a I don't know that I would call it a genre, because there are many genres in this style.
Right.
It's certainly a style worth exploring more, but that one in particular caught me, probably because of the relationship and the fraternal bond and the guilt for repercussions of one's actions when one's too young. So it had that nuanced, layered complexity that I really enjoyed.
But
In addition,
the
lots of
storytelling. Sorry, the storytelling of Scott Pilgrim had its own unique flavor too. That was the thing that really interested me.
but yeah, so I will continue to create these, and it was actually after your interview that I decided, because there's a well-established screenplay competition path that you enter, for the accolades, but also to see if you're any good, and see if anybody will step forward to represent you. And I was fortunate enough to get represented with the screenplay of A Light Before the Darkness, and that one got optioned. Not an uncommon story in this town, optioned but never produced.
Yeah.
And they're like, in the supermarket, every other person in line falls in that category. But it was an arena I was familiar with, and I really wanted to know, is this for my niche audience? Is this something worth their time, or is this something I'm just going to be doing for myself? And so far, I've been pretty pleasantly surprised by the getting picked up by Marcosia, a UK publisher of indie graphic novels, and the award success I've had with this win, a couple of their finalists. So it tells me that I'm not completely wasting my time.
Okay, that's good.
So it's a happy thing. Yeah.
So when you're not working on comics, what are you doing?
I've also helped produce and direct some short animation, but you can't juggle those two mistresses. So pretty much graphic novels are my concentration. It looks like for the next 3 or 4 years.
I see. Okay. Okay, great. So thanks for coming on the show and explaining this.
Well, thank you. And I know the reviews on Caged Birds will be mixed, but I know I can depend on you and Mulele to steer me in a direction for things that need fixing. So,
okay.
thank you in advance.
Coming up, Mulele and I critique Caged Birds, and a listener tells us what he likes about critiquing comics. Many years ago, when we changed from a hard-coded website to a WordPress site, the first 3 years' worth of Deconstructing Comics episodes became unavailable. Thanks to the support of our patrons, these classic early episodes have been gradually unlocked, and I've been putting them back on the site in reverse order. This week I'll republish number 49 from November 13th, 2006, in which we discuss Batman and Tarzan, Claws of the Catwoman, and Brandon talks about his figure drawing class. Find the classic episodes on our Facebook and Twitter feeds by choosing the earliest months listed in the sidebar pull-down menu at deconstructingcomics.com, in publicly available posts on our Patreon page, or in the Patreon smartphone app. Classic episodes have been unlocked back to number 46, so only 3 more classic episodes will be re-released unless we meet our next Patreon goal. And you can help make our Full Metal Alchemist podcast a reality as well. Check out all our goals and help us reach them at patreon.com/deconcomics.
You like cheap comic books, right? Well, I'm Professor Allen, and I talk about cheap comic books on the Quarterbin podcast. In every episode, I'll dissect a single comic from my collection, as long as I paid no more than 25 cents for the issue. Forget about $4 new comics that you can read in 4 minutes, or crossover events that can cost $100 to collect. Join me in the Quarterbin, where even bad comics are a bargain, and good ones are a steal. The Quarterbin podcast is part of the Relatively Geeky Podcast Network. Visit us at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search Relatively Geeky or Quarterbin Podcast in iTunes. I guarantee it'll be worth every penny.
Okay, we're back, and we're going to talk about Caged Birds. Right. Well, before we started recording, Mulele said he wasn't sure what the comic was about, and that was the first thing I wrote in my notes. What's the comic about? And what's the point of the first scene? And so Ken explained that in the interview. I don't quite remember what he said now, but I found it confusing. Okay, so this was my take on the comic the first time I read it.
Yeah.
So the first scene, okay, so these are two young women who want to be lovers and their parents don't approve.
Right.
So this is going to be a story about these two girls trying to be together. And it wasn't at all. The one girl became irrelevant to the story. And it was just, what was her name? So Sophia was the one who became irrelevant. Anna becomes the main character. And now she's walking down the street and she hears a piano lesson going on, which Sophia happens to be the student. I don't think we ever see her again after that. And then afterwards, Anna is approaching the teacher, who she calls Mr. George, and she says that she wants him to convince her father to let her be in the class again. And so so that's the goal here, that to get her into his class. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get anything more from that.
Right.
And then she's talking with her family, parents and aunts and uncles. I don't know who all these people are. And then he says, okay, it will be acceptable. I thought, okay, so it's okay for her to be in Mr. George's class.
Yeah.
She seems really grateful for that for some reason. And her dad's kind of afraid that she's leaving forever or something. And then while she's in her bedroom, they're talking about how she'll make a beautiful bride. And I thought, why are they trying to get her married to this guy? That doesn't seem to be what she wants, is what I thought.
Yeah.
Then she sneaks out the window and she goes to George's place. And she says she hates him, and he says he loves her. And then he starts giving her a lesson, and I thought sexually assaults her while she's playing. And okay, he's sexually assaulting her, and now the next panel they're getting married. What? That was how I read it the first time. Because
what?
he just sexually assaulted her and now she's getting married to him. But the thing was, it was never clearly stated for me anyway, that she wanted to get married to him or that he wanted her to get married to him. Marriage was never mentioned except that bit about the bride when she wasn't even in the room. Mm-hmm. So I was going off in a totally different direction reading these first few scenes. And then reading it the second time, I saw that they weren't talking anymore about her being in Mr. George's class. They were talking about her marrying him. Mm-hmm. And it needs to be stated more strongly there for me. How did you feel about that part?
So far, none of it makes sense to me, and it all seems to be kind of skipping around without rhyme or reason. Now, you can say that in a person's life, it will go through these stages, and maybe this is a case where she, at first, was a promiscuous little girl, then she was a young woman who loved music and wanted to get to this professor's class, and then suddenly she's marrying this person. They were secret lovers, and then they married, and now he's given her special lessons as his wife. And after that, it kind of starts to kind of skip ahead one season per panel. The autumn, winter, spring, she practiced, and she was getting good. But still, he was the master. And then we start to see that the marriage is having some problems, or maybe he's having performance issues. I'm not sure. It goes to the doctor and says, your heart's fucked. And by this point, we've kind of sped through the story so much. I'm kind of wondering, what's the point of telling this story?
Well, I should say, though, European films, the few that I've watched, felt the same way.
Okay, sure. But this comic has a couple of of other things that it's trying to do that are kind of new for American audiences, on top of the European storytelling. And that is the loopy panel order with the loopy word balloon order. And I understand where it seems that the dialogue was applied after the art was made, because sometimes there's space for a balloon and there's no balloon there, and sometimes there's no space for a balloon and there's lots of dialogue. And just the direction of the panels is generally ignored. It's treated as one big picture, and the word balloon order is sometimes a little obtuse. And there's something very interesting in its design dynamic, but it fails as a narrative device because it doesn't follow any sort of rules that I can discern. It just is there as a piece unto itself. So the dialogue is fragmented, as well as seems like it has gone through Google Translate a couple of times for some of the kind of rhythm of the dialogue. I mean, that first 2 or 3 pages of dialogue is like, oh, geez, what? And it smooths out a little bit, generally when there's more dialogue to be had, but some of it is just kind of confounding. It's like, okay, and why are you telling me this? And how did this apply to the rest of the story? And what is the forward momentum of this story? Is her goal just to use this guy to get on stage? Or are we doing just a random, this is her life and this is how it turned out kind of story? It's also showing, instead of music, it's using color in kind of this curtain sheen that kind of flows over all of the panels where there's supposed to be music, rather than actually having musical notes, which is not necessarily a bad idea, but it's a new idea and it's not well introduced. So it's got all of these new things going and all of these kind of wild design choices. And then on top of that, there's a narrative structure that is strictly European. But I mean, it's not like, a quirky kind of Luc Besson movie, Fifth Element or like that. But it is one of those really like impenetrable French art house films where shit happens and you don't know why. There's no cause or effect, but just like a stream of consciousness. And so for all of this stuff, it's really hard to follow. And so I can kind of identify what happened, but there's no why or how we got from A to B. It's like, okay, this happened, this happened, this happened. And that's the thing I find most confounding about this.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's kind of unclear. Yeah, what's going to be the point of this story? And maybe it's, the European film structure is probably part of the problem for us Americans. But
but if there's a kernel or something where just a panel where she's like, I'm going to get to the stage and it's going to be a fucked up situation, but here we go. And then I've got a thread that I can follow through. Or somewhere where I can discern her logic flow. And then when we get to the prostitutes at the end, it's like, what? Okay, so I guess his marriage was not going well? But wait a minute, doesn't he have heart problems? What is all this shit? And so none of it seems to kind of fit together. And sometimes I'm like, okay, so that's the husband, right? Okay, now who are these people? Okay, and what is their connection to this, and why is this scene important? But what I came to is that none of it's important. And I mean, it's totally fine as its own thing, where you're saying, okay, it's about this woman, and I'm going to talk about her life, her rise. Or it's about this guy, and how his downfall was falling for women for the wrong reasons, or his lifestyle was a random smattering of poor choices. But I can't even tell that much. And so we got the first two issues of a 6-part story. And to be honest, I can't see where you'd get issue 1 and then you'd have to get issue 2.
Like, I got to find out what happens next.
Yeah, because you didn't know what happened in the first issue. So what would drive you to get to the second issue? You'd either have to really love this style of storytelling, or you'd have to really love the artwork. And the artwork is very detailed, and the artist drew their ass off.
It's a guy named Gianluca Testaverde. He's Italian.
Yeah, I mean, he really put a lot of effort into those pages. There needed to be much more teamwork with the script writer to make sure that you had a balance between dialogue and rhythm of panels, because you can kind of see where the artist ignored the script, or the writer didn't give the script and then just wrote whatever the fuck he wanted over the art. Because it does not, it's like oil and water. Just does not blend on the page.
Yeah, if I'm looking at page 23, the panel in the doctors, the first panel, there's plenty of room for dialogue, but there's like 5 words of dialogue in the whole panel.
Yeah.
But other panels, yeah, it's just snaking all over the place.
Yeah, yeah, and in some cases, the dialogue works with the panel. Like on page 22, it actually works pretty well. But page 23, it's really ugly the way a lot of the word balloons are kind of set up, almost like it was lettered by someone else. Like they've got 2 different letters.
Well, it was lettered by the writer. I do know that.
The writer in the first half of the comic book had all caps on. Up until page 11 or page 10, because you get capital I in the middle of a lot of words.
Yeah, the serifed I when it's not the personal pronoun.
Yeah, and then it starts to kind of intermittently appear from page 11. And later in the comic, it seems to kind of... no, it appears later in the comic too. It just comes and goes. So it does very much feel like the writer lettered himself. I mean, the way the script treats the artwork very much feels like that. The lettering is giving direction to which way to go to look at the panels, even though the artist had already established which way the panels flowed. And they don't necessarily coincide.
Yeah, well, there are places where the word balloons tell us to read right to left.
Yeah, I saw that in a couple of places. And there are some panels where the word balloons just absolutely destroy the art. Specifically, page 25, where the concert is finished and the audience is shouting "Brava!" And that lettering just wrecks the panel. And
how so? Explain more.
Okay. So the audience is in the foreground in shadow, and then in the distance there is the stage with the main characters, and it's a well-drawn, well-balanced, very competent panel. It even has plenty of space up top for word balloons.
On 24. Okay, the bottom of 24.
Sorry, yeah, you're right. It's 24, not 25.
Okay.
My mistake. Yeah. And then we have a couple of bravas here and there. that the audience is shouting, but the stems of the or I guess the tails of the word balloons are so thick as to obstruct the visuals.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really just disrespectful to the artist at this point.
Yeah.
Especially when there is space for Brava to be here and there without it obscuring the artwork like that. And even in the next panel where they have just this guy thinking of a question, it's like, what?
Yeah,
but
just a question mark is the only dialogue. And
yeah,
the audience is now silent.
Yeah, but the question mark is actually placed on the ear of another person. It's like, why? Why would you do that? You could have put it above his head where the artist was thinking it probably belonged. But you put it on his ear. It just, there's a lot of whys here. Speaking to the writer who is most likely listening to this, my advice to you is to fire yourself and get a proper letterer and limit the amount of dialogue that you have to, say, 200 words per page, or fewer actually. I had this discussion with Kumar back with Weird Crime Theater, and it was the same thing. He said, "Oh, but 250 words per page is totally fine." And we fought on the page. You can see it in the first issue, first story of Weird Crime Theater. But after a while, we kind of got to an understanding where I needed to give him more space and he needed to write fewer words. And I think at one point I said, "Look, man, count up how many words of dialogue in this Bendis book," and it was something like 50 words per page. He's like, "Okay, well, I guess modern comics." Because he was
and Bendis is kind of wordy compared to some other comics. Yeah.
Well, I might have chosen a Bendis page that didn't have many words on it, but but basically, Kumar's like, okay, I guess Silver Age comic aesthetics don't work here, and so he adjusted his stuff. I don't know how he felt about it personally, like it was my problem or something he would have to put up with my artwork, or if it was something that he actually agreed with after looking at what modern comics were doing. I have no idea about that. You have to ask him. But I'm seeing a problem here. And yeah, on page 25, you got lots of places to put dialogue, but completely ignored, and just it runs amok everywhere. Especially panel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Panel 6. That's fucked up.
That stem running across the silent panel?
I don't see the stem running across the silent panel.
We're on what, page 24?
Sorry, 25.
25.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Where they're embracing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And we have that word balloon tail that touches her lip for some weird reason, but kind of ducks under her earring. And I'm just, okay, so you got all this space.
Yeah, and there's all this space, behind him, really behind her, we're just curtain.
Yeah, and so, we got to pay attention to the curtains, but you know what? Her face, her arms, the embrace itself, fuck all that noise. The curtains and her earring, that's important. And the dialogue, of course. And so there are a lot of problems here with that. And that's why I say, as the writer, fine, set up your pages, know what you need the page to be, know what it shouldn't be, and then hire the people to do the job. But if you're lettering this comic yourself because you want a level of control here that you feel you're missing because you're not actually constructing the pages yourself, you're now just being greedy and you're disrupting the comic. As the writer, you set the pace, you set everything that you need. And if you're the producer on this thing, then you're choosing the artist, you're paying the artist. You have a level of control there that producers get. So use that and instruct the artist what you need and really communicate with them, because the way it's been lettered here, it's clearly nothing has been communicated to the artist, who did do an excellent job pacing this thing and balancing this thing. So, yeah, just in that sense, that's the biggest thing that I have with this, is how the script and the artwork don't jive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder if when he's putting the word balloons in, it's kind of like if you're taking a photo of somebody and you're not paying attention to what's in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's thinking that this person's saying this and this person's saying that, but where am I putting the balloon? Is it what's behind it? What's the background? Where's a good place to put it?
Yeah. Clearly, he's not a designer either. So yeah.
Yeah, the art is quite good. I have no complaints about like the figure drawing or anything like that. There were a few little places that bothered me. On page 22, those first two panels. When you first look at it, it looks like one big panel.
Yeah, it
and
is.
He's coming up behind her, but no, he's in the first panel there with his back to us. But yet he's coming out of the second panel into the first panel where he already exists, and it looks like the two figures in the foreground are in one panel, and they're not. There needs to be some separation between those panels so that we don't get confused.
Well, I mean, it should be a gutter, really, with no overlap of his hand. But in fact, what he decided to do, ultra clever, is to make the door itself the transition line of the panel. And that just doesn't work. It winds up being just a giant tangent on the page. And it is confusing.
Also, I guess you didn't get all the way into the second issue, or very far into it.
Not very far, unfortunately.
Well, I think if you read the first issue, it's probably not even a spoiler to say that George dies in the second issue.
Yeah, I could kind of see something coming.
Yeah, I saw it coming a million miles away there. So he dies when he's with the prostitute. Let's see, on page 14 of the second issue. And he has picked her up and they're walking into the bedroom, and then he collapses and they fall on the bed. And so they fall, and she's saying George, and then the next panel she's got a telephone in her hand. And I just felt like there needed to be some transition there between falling on the bed and picking up the telephone. It felt kind of too abrupt that she was suddenly on the phone with the operator. Or is that or I think it looks like the letter P is missing from the word operator. Yeah,
it's an orator.
Yeah, orator. And there are some other spelling mistakes I noticed. Let's get into the English major part of this discussion.
Okay.
So in that scene where I didn't quite realize that they were deciding that she was going to get married to George, surprise is spelled with a Z when it should be an S. They're inconsistently, sometimes he gets it right, but there are places where he gets breathe and breath confused. Breathe should have an E at the end. Scream in one place is spelled CREEM rather than EAM as it should. And then the old classic confusion of you are, and you are YOUR, the possessive.
Yeah.
Yeah, need a proofreader. I'm available.
Yeah, Tim will be on that shit like white on rice. So, yeah, definitely.
I don't know. I don't have too much else to say about it. Anything else come to your mind?
My question really is, what is the point of this? What is he trying to do? I mean, like, what is the purpose of this whole project beyond just make a comic?
Yeah. Yeah. What's your target here as a writer? Where is this supposed to be going?
Yeah, that's basically it. And the fact that after 2.25 issues, I don't know. That is a major problem. I would say if these have not been printed yet, fix the lettering, and it'll go a long way to helping the comic with coherency, and just it being a little bit, even just visually coherent, because right now you're even lacking that in some areas.
Mm-hmm.
But if it has been printed, then fine. Just go with what you got. And for whatever you haven't printed yet, for God's sakes, do not be the letter on those next issues. Because there is a craft to it, and he's not quite ready for prime time.
Yeah. So, in the previous episode, or maybe more than one previous episode, I wondered out loud what people like about critiquing comics. And our listener, Dylan, who actually was on Deconstructing Comics once, commented on the episode on our blog and answered the question from his perspective. So he said, I can give an answer for the question posed by Tim at the end of this episode. Why do people like the Critiquing Comics shows? Number one, it's a good way to find out about comics that exist in the first place. The good reviews curate some stuff to look at. I've gotten into quite a few good comics through the reviews on here, like the Big Ugly Robot books, Chad in Amsterdam, Read More Comics, Esoteric Dialogue, etc. This kind of show is important in a day and age where we are swimming in a sea of media begging for attention. And number two, these critiques are handy for someone like me that wants to get into creating comics. The critiques give us food for thought. You two pair well, as Tim usually picks up on writing or plot errors, while Mulele is excellent at explaining the fundamentals of art and giving suggestions on it. So, Dylan, thank you.
That is awesome. Thank you. That is in fact high praise.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to know now why people are interested.
Yeah. Well, hopefully when we're critical, we're not too critical. A couple of years ago, it would have been a different story. I was like, fuck this guy. He's a fucking turd. But
yeah, the early critiques were quite harsh, as I recall.
They were. And I have a special place in my heart for guilt over OK Casey. Was that it?
Oh, yeah.
It's like the first one.
Something. Yeah, one of the very first ones.
Yeah,
back when we were still doing it on Deconstructing Comics, I think.
Yeah, and
Go KC, that was it. Go KC.
Yeah, Go KC. I'm sorry. And I would say that even as critical as I was in this review, it is specifically for Ken Mora. And perhaps the artist, if he is listening as well. First and foremost, I'm speaking to them. And after that, I'm speaking to the rest of the audience. Mm-hmm. So, with respect.
Right. Well, I mean, I think talking about where to put your word balloons and, having someone who knows the craft of lettering doing it is important for anybody who's wanting to make comics.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you've got a comic that you've created that you'd like us to critique, or you know someone who's making comics that we should take a look at, send a PDF or a link to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and we'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. So, till next time, this is Tim.
I'm Mulele.
And thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics. Support this and all of our shows by joining us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/deconcomics for more details. You can also help us out by reviewing us on Apple or any other podcast source. Do your shopping at deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon so that we get a percentage of the sale. Subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. Increasing our number of subscribers helps a lot, and you'll get our episodes automatically every week. We also hope you'll share your favorite DCP episodes on your social media. We appreciate your support in bringing Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Polls to a larger audience. Our theme is from bensound.com. Famed comics writer and editor Denny O'Neil passed away on June 11th. And next week on Deconstructing Comics, Emmett will discuss O'Neill's legacy with Professor Jonathan W. Gray, author of such books as Civil Rights in the White Literary Imagination and the founding editor of the Journal of Comics and Culture. In the meantime, you might want to go back and listen to Coombs' interview with O'Neill from last year. It's in Deconstructing Comics 621 from April 3rd, 2019. Till next week, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics.